I will hand over straight away to Peter. You will have all read Peter's bio, so I'll just hand over to him and let him tell you a bit more about himself. So over to you, Peter, and welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Janet. Lovely to see so many people. Well, basically, we've got a 45-minute slot to talk about this important subject of creativity. I'm really passionate about it. I like to think that I'm a creative person in my work as a leader and in my educational roles, a tutor with the OU and as a consultant. And so I really want to try and share some of the ideas and techniques I've been using, which have really helped me. And of course, my roots on this go fundamentally right back to doing my MBA with the OU, where I first got introduced to the idea that creativity and innovation could be a subject in its own right, but we really need to try and find ways to embed it practically. So there are my details there, but you can get that at the end, and that's a lovely picture to set us in the mood of down in Dorset. So let's move ahead with the next slide and get started. So I'll just advance it. Right, here we are. Here's the aim, really to give you some practical insights. Some of this material may well be covering old ground. It might just refresh you. Some of it might give you a new angle. But I think it's really focusing on what you can do practically as a leader to promote creativity. So we'll have a look at really kind of three main segments and a final kind of takeaway checklist. Really looking at some of the behaviors that you can adopt to be more effective as a leader. And then two segments there looking at actually how do we get these ideas moving forward, because without these ideas we're not going to get any kind of innovation or change. So if you have any questions, just fire away and Janet will feed them in as and when. Just a bit of scene setting. A very interesting study done in 2010 by IBM surveyed 1,500 CEOs across 60 countries, many industries, and one of the top findings was the need for creativity, because more than rigor, management discipline, integrity, or even vision, above that comes creativity. But if you don't believe the CEOs, this is a little picture actually done by, I think, a 10-year-old looking at a careers fair. I was hosting a stand. We were asking them, what do you think are going to be the skills needed for the future? And look at that, problem-solving, lateral thinking in the minds of 10-year-olds thinking about their future. So we've got to think about where they'll be in 5, 10, 15 years' time. Let's look at a few simple behaviors. I think number one for me is active listening. The other day I asked a local politician, I said, what's the most important skill as a politician? And he said listening and empathy, really listening for the kind of weak signals. The second two lozenges there really kind of indicate that the idea that, I get a pointer here, hopefully, that really you might hear stuff from your people or people around you think that's just rubbish. It's a rubbish idea, but you've got to find the little gems of insight, because nobody actually opens their mouth and says, yeah, I've got an idea, 50% of it is rubbish, but what do you think? So we really need to actively listen for the good in it, find the good in what people are offering. And that requires empathy. I also think it requires more time with your people, maybe in different environments. So having meetings always in your office as opposed to, let's say, on the grass, that's me there, actually with some MBA students. But you connect in a different way by changing the environment, even going to a canteen. Managers all know we need to have empathy, but somehow in many organizations there are these disconnects and there's lack of trust across the different hierarchies. So maybe that's one tip. I think for me this is a very important metaphor, and I kind of owe my thinking about this to the Synectics Corporation, one of the world leaders in promoting creativity and innovation. On what they have this model that actually, if you're trying to be creative, it's not about getting down in the pit where people are. Yes, you need to understand their problems and situations, but we want people to, as leaders, to try and help people see the higher vision, the higher viewpoint. So yes, we need to understand them, but we need to throw them a lifeline, metaphorically, so that they can see the view that we can see as leaders, and they can see the bigger picture. So that's quite a powerful metaphor. As Gandhi and many others say, you know, be the change you want to be, model the behavior you want to see. I think it's important for your staff to see that you may be uncertain, and to have your own uncensored thoughts. I know this is not, it's politically requires some interesting skills, but if you have all your utterings as being ones that are kind of official, and you don't share your inner self, and you don't share your challenges to your current organization, like what if we were to abandon our smaller customers? Could be heresy in many contexts, but if we don't open up or say how might we ... find a new way to do X, Y, Z, then I think as a leader your staff won't see that behavior being modeled, and you won't get the level of creativity you want. So really, I think it's about unblocking, and there's a great technique, you know, how to or I wish. Here's a simple idea. In fact, the other day I suggested a change to a process, and somebody said that would be too expensive. So immediately my kind of idea was killed off. And I was wanting them to say, could they turn that around and say, I wish we could find a way to reduce the cost, or I wish we could find some funding for it. So these simple phraseologies really make a difference as a leader. And our famous model on this slide, Albert Einstein, had this fantastic quote, which I really love, because, you know, if there's nothing absurd about an idea, then yes, it's a great idea, but we don't really need that much sort of creativity. So you actually have to promote those ideas and those thoughts that do have a bit of weirdness, a bit of absurdity about it. Otherwise, you know, we won't get any breaking out of the existing mold. So that's a good one you can stick up on the office wall. An academic or a serious and academic concept that's been developing in the last 15 years is the idea of adaptive leadership by Ronald Heifetz and his colleagues, also Marty Linsky and Grashow, I don't know his first name. And there's this idea that too often we look at a problem technically. You look at it at the prime ministers, world leaders, or CEOs, whether it's a banking crisis or something else. We expect our leaders to have the technical answers, but actually creativity is often required because we have a problem that requires a shift in attitude or values, beliefs, or behaviors. And you as a leader, no matter what your rank or grade is, you may not have, you may have all this technical skill, but it won't necessarily shift the situation. So adaptive leadership is a very important concept, and I think we'll find more and more business schools teaching this, and it'll become mainstream very, very soon, if not already in some areas. So adaptive leaders see the challenge or the situation as one that can't be addressed by the technical expertise. And this idea of giving the problem back to the people, showing your vulnerability. You don't know the answer, but I can lead the process for us all to find a way through it. You might also be a lightning conductor. You might get people's stress being directed at you. And as a leader in this situation, which does require creativity, you have to kind of regulate people's stress. So that's a key concept about adaptive leadership. So for me, I think that's a very important behavior that we need to have to promote creativity. So now we're coming to our first kind of poll, really to sort of diagnose how you feel about this. So I'm going to ask Janet to set the poll up. I can see there. So what's the greatest challenge to implementing a creative culture, or perhaps a more creative culture, in your organization? Is it A, that the lack of support from the top? B, maybe this isn't a priority for you right now. You're just delivering, the operational business. C, we'd love to be, but we don't have the skill set in creative learning and thinking. D, maybe the culture just won't promote it. Or E, actually, we're doing absolutely fantastic. We are in that top, 5%, 10% that are highly creative. So let's move on. We'll let you vote, and Janet, do feel free to interject. We'll get the results in a minute.
Peter, there are a few people still voting, so we'll give people just a little bit longer if you want to carry on, and I'll tell you when the poll's finished. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. So why don't we actually move on to the next slide to sort of save a bit of time, and perhaps we can come back to that. So I don't mind being interrupted. So let's move on a bit. Okay, so the next sort of segment is really about kind of nurturing ideas, and we'll just see how the poll results, when they come out, how they interleave with what I'm saying. I think this is titled Practical Creativity. So we've got loads and loads of techniques, fantastic books and frameworks and academic theories, but I think there's no substitute for having some kind of basic materials. We'll come back to the poll in a second. I can just see the results there. So really, you know, have some good spaces, have some idea walls. In schools now, the teachers talk about learning walls. How often in organizations do people have on the walls stuff that's about their own products? Well, that's great, but you ain't going to get much kind of a breakthrough. Maybe encourage more of a graffiti culture. Get those whiteboards up, so when people have got thoughts or ideas, particularly in the corridors, they can be put down there. And really, I think everyone needs a basic kind of toolkit. But I'm really surprised the number of meetings that I go to. I'm sure many of you go to, perhaps with external stakeholders, and you're not controlling the venue. Well, we don't have flip charts. Oh, we don't have anybody with a computer that can put things into a spreadsheet. We don't have anybody with a camera, or they say, oh, my phone's not working or something. And we turn around and we try and find a facilitator. So as a leader, you need to have a way of making sure you can quickly access this stuff. Okay, let's have a look at the poll results. And in fact, I'll just go back to the poll questions on the slides here. So outcome B is interesting. It's coming out as kind of the highest result, and then followed by A. So Janet, have we got any questions coming through on that, or if anybody's got any thoughts, what do you think about this poll result?
We haven't got any questions at the moment, Peter, but I do understand totally with this high-pressured world we all live in about the priorities are on survival or delivering, so that poll doesn't surprise me. I'm not sure what you think.
Yeah, I think, yes, of course, we have to do that. But it's interesting because maybe this points to the idea of kind of continuous improvement or incremental change. So while you're actually surviving and delivering, well, can you kind of deliver next week your products and services, 2% a bit more? Interesting. I read in the UK press about Asda. They're number 2 grocers. They're under great price pressure from these discounted supermarket stores. But Asda, despite being low price, is still finding ways to cut costs even more. So that's perhaps an example of an organization that's already very lean and probably quite creative in the way that they go about their business. I don't know the insides of Asda. So you can do a bit of creativity whilst doing B. Interestingly, A, lack of support from the top leaders or the board. I think really one just needs to kind of act as an entrepreneur and just make yourself a local little focus of expertise here. If you start being more creative, maybe people on top will actually wake up to it. So I think you can maybe have more of a microculture where you are. So this idea of a microculture, never mind what the rest of them are doing, what can you do as a leader to promote that? But yeah, very interesting. Do feel free to comment and blog away at some stage about this. So we've talked about the materials. So I think having creative time is important. This is a controversial topic because some people would say that actually the sort of creativity should be embedded in the way you work every day, minute by minute. But I think that 100% kind of creativity kind of drives people a bit, round the bend. So even in those beacon organizations we hear of, like Apple and Google and Twitter, Facebook, I'm sure that it's not all whiz-bang, creativity, feet up, throwing the softballs around and the coffee cups. So you do actually need to get an interesting balance. But here's a tip. As a leader, why don't you actually signal that? Use the word. Okay, let's have a creative session about that. Rather than just, we're going to have a meeting to solve X, Y, Z problem. We'll have a creative session. Oh, and Ravi, in this case, can you facilitate for us? So as a leader, you don't have to be the leader and the facilitator all the time. Find people who are good to facilitate.
Peter, can I just interrupt there?
Yeah.
I have just noticed that we have got quite a good question from Kevin, who has said he works in a very risk-averse company who want creativity, but it has to be failure-free. How can he approach that without scaring them? I think that's an excellent question.
That's really, oh yes. I mean, there are endless quotes about, particularly in innovation and in creativity, you've got to be able to fail. I would turn the failure around into terms of this idea, and we'll come to it later, about cycles of inquiry or experimenting or trialing. So if somebody says, no, that's a rubbish idea, it won't work, or I'm not backing your scheme, you could say, well, look, can we just try it? Can we do a rapid prototype, maybe, at low cost, not even spending any money? A lot of organizations, when they're trying to map out new processes, they will do a rapid prototype of a process, and they'll parallel run it with the existing embedded concrete process. And as people can see this prototype being done, let's say in an office or with some kind of role play, they will gradually come over to it. But yeah, it's a very, very difficult situation. So perhaps we'll come on to, perhaps our next segments will give some ideas about that. So let's move on. I think that for me a metaphor it's important is this idea of leaders creating bridges between ideas and between teams. If as the leader you define your team as having a particular role or kind of boundary, and another department, another division, another part of your organization in a different part of the country is doing something different, then it begs the question, well, who does the joining up? Do we rely on layers of managers and coordinators above us to join things up? Or maybe we as a leader, we actually have to get in our little car here and we actually have to cross the bridge and go and see the other team. Or we kind of create connections. But creating connections between the ideas is important. And for me, this is very important. I think a lot of people associate the idea with the identity. They talk about Joe's idea or Robin's idea or Peter's idea. But really we should be talking about our ideas. So even if the person in blue down here, their idea didn't really take off, it might have triggered an idea from the person in red, and we can join that up with the idea from the people in purple, green, and orange. And maybe out of that, only one or two things will move forward to the next stage of our kind of innovation process. But I like the idea of our ideas rather than having our identity connected with, oh, talk to Janet, she's got a great idea about X, Y, Z. It may be the power of her idea is triggered someone else to take something else forward. Let's have a look. I can't read all these questions and present, but I can see them on the right-hand side.
I was going to say, Peter, if you want me to, I was going to say, do you want me to come to them at the end, or I can read them out for you now?
Yeah.
Okay.
When perhaps we pause this segment.
All right.
So, an idea. Here's something that often people have ideas about. How do you keep them? The point about creativity is that ideas will arrive at any time. So yes, I'm sure all of you listening will have the routine perhaps of having a notebook where you can jot things down. But how are we going to collate all that? Ideas from people. The ideas from, let's say, the cleaners in a hospital who can see a way to improve the process for improving care for patients. How do they get an opportunity to take what's in their mind at the time? Oh, we could improve A and B and C, and to put it on paper or in a computer. We mustn't lose these because we want to take all these ideas and synthesize them for the next step. So before we come on to poll 2, Janet, yes, I like your, well, while you're voting on poll 2, which is now up, we saw a question earlier, Janet. I saw one there about, I've seen questions from recent ones, Elizabeth, Samantha,
yes.
And Mark.
Yes, Elizabeth has asked, and I think we all can sympathise with this. When stretched as thin as we can be, how can we creatively find the time to have that space to do more than survive?
Okay. Well, should we just take that one? I think one can often embed creativity in a stealthy way. If you think of it in terms of an improvement project, everyone loves improvement, continuous improvement, innovation, techniques such as lean, these often find favour with managers who perhaps like a more traditional approach. As soon as you
So
start using the word creativity, people have a different view of it. Sorry.
Okay, sorry, Peter. That's exactly what I was going to say. Are you suggesting that rather than call it creativity, you actually give it a different label?
Yeah, innovation's a good one. I mean, although we know we can't have innovation without creativity. So I think you have to go with the particular culture in your organization. I mean, you might have, for example, after-action reviews of a project or a program or an initiative. You can build in that the opportunity to reflect on what ideas have come out of that. So you can tag the creativity into the review of projects.
Okay.
So and the one there from...
shall I read Samantha's?
Yes,
Samantha
please, yeah,
has said, creativity is very important. We all have very long lists of ideas that we would like to work on. How do we ensure that we don't simply add to the list of things we will never get around to doing and lead to employees becoming disengaged? I mean, I do know myself what Samantha means. I have a wish list and you know, and an absolutely to-do list. So yeah.
I think that's a good point. And there's a couple of things you can do. One can kind of synthesize those in some way so the list appears shorter. You can, of course, decide to do the 3 Ds. You either do something, you delegate it, or you dump it. You simply just don't do it. You say, yeah, I know that's a great thing to do or idea, but it's the wrong context, wrong time, and maybe you revisit it. So you have a much shorter list. But I think it's not about getting around to doing the idea. It's about matching the ideas to the business priorities. So, you know, if you have a business priority which is somehow to reduce waste, which most organizations seem to face, or reduce cost, then if you can marry those ideas to something that's a high priority, then they will get people's attention. So that's one way around it. Okay, yeah. So let's move on to poll 2. So from what you've heard so far, or perhaps your own wider thinking, what's the most important thing for you to do to nurture creativity? What's the most important route for you to do that? Is it A, perhaps changing the physical environment in some way, making it more relaxed? B, about learning more techniques? C, in a wider sense, creating a better sort of climate, ambiance, or culture, which may or may not be to do with the physical environment? Is it D, actually adopting a more experimental approach? Or is it E, going back to that support thing, getting support from key stakeholders, particularly, let's say, customers, or not necessarily the top board? So while we're getting those results through, Janet, have we finished? I can see we've got a fair number of...
Yes, we have. They have finished now. So if you want, can you see the results, Peter?
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
Okay.
So D, I can't see E coming up on the screen there. I don't know why. Not to worry. Yeah, D, creating a better climate. Yep. Oh, I think we've got a slight mismatch.
Yes, I think we must have. I do apologise.
We'll go with the wording that's on the screen here.
Sorry.
I tell you, that's my fault here. But, you know, the first principle of creativity: learn from your kind of failures. That was my fault. I adjusted the poll wording yesterday, and something's got lost in translation. So, assuming that the D here, adopting a more experimental approach, perhaps is the main one. But anyway, whatever it is, changing a physical environment, it doesn't seem to have much impact. Training people up in techniques, yeah, difficult to tell from that. So maybe it's a spread. But it's interesting that A obviously doesn't. Maybe it's more difficult and costly to do. But you can even change it in a small kind of micro way, the way you do things. I know one famous managing director of, well, he's famous because of his way of operating. He used to run a company called Dutton Engineering, and people said to him, well, we want an open door policy. We want managers to be accessible. So one lunchtime, using his own hands, no, not one lunch, yeah, one lunchtime in his own time, he got a drill and he took the door off his office and he got rid of it. And he said, "You want an open door policy? There we are. I've actually taken the door off my office." And that was very much a symbol to other people that he was open to ideas. So I'm not suggesting you go away and do that tomorrow, but it's something to think about when you have that open door philosophy. You know, the very fact you've got a door there and can be closed, maybe it's closing off a few ideas. Maybe some of those meetings are a bit too closed. So my fault with the poll mixed up. Anyway, interesting discussion. There might be some questions coming up on that. Janet, any points from you?
Sorry, yes, there is. We could mention the one from Mark. Bear with me one moment. I'm just going back to the questions. Mark has said, bear with me, I seem to have lost Mark's comments. Perhaps if you'd like to carry on, I'll find Mark's comments. Sorry.
The joy of the technology. No, that's fine. I think it's remarkable that we can do this. Who would have thought, 10 years ago we might be doing this kind of thing. So here's a few techniques to help your colleagues who perhaps may not have the benefit of OU Business School education or an MBA, or have gone through the specialist elective in the MBA looking at creativity. So people who are thinking, what on earth is this all about? Well, a lot of people, I think, are a bit nervous, and I think an earlier point we had that the word creativity itself can put people off. People think it's a bit childish or a bit kind of not serious. And yet most of the ads we see on TV for utilities, products or whatever are actually pretty ridiculous. Sometimes you have grown men and women behaving like 2-year-olds or vice versa, heads changing around and fantasy, people, all kinds of fantasy stuff. So people use it in the advertising and sales world because they want to grab our attention. But here's a technique you can use. Start with small challenges. Ask your staff to come up with, can you give me 10 ideas about how we can improve a particular point? Just 10 ideas. Not like, oh, sit down and flood the room full of Post-its. Just 10 ideas. This Japanese word shuko, or kind of secondment, rather than making it a big plan thing, a job change, could you do it for just an hour or a week or a day? Could you actually get ideas, this idea of secondment for getting ideas from somewhere else? So immediately we're into this idea of the notion of getting ideas from one context to bringing them back to our own. That is a key to a part of creativity. Rewarding people's ideas publicly. Again, you don't need to use that creativity word. And I think more time off for people to do stuff that they love doing. I mean, when people come back over their tea, coffee, and lunch, they get passionate about their hobbies, don't they, and their families. Perhaps 10 times more passionate than they do about stuff at work in many cases. So really ignite that passion and see what is it about that member of staff that really likes, let's say, being a specialist in doing up Volkswagen cars and going to beach buggy type festivals where they, have all the festivals of the cars there. What is it? What's their skill set that's being used there that we can bring into work? So that's, I think, is a key point. Make learning fun. This is an idea that came from a school's project I was involved with. So this was in a secondary school, and somebody had this idea of, well, kind of learning is really, really boring. So why don't we have a learning cinema? You could say YouTube is a learning cinema, but what I like is this idea in a cinema, it's popcorn, it's a bit of magic, a bit of fun. So how can we make training and development and learning and innovating just a bit more fun? Can you produce a learning cinema in your workplace, maybe? I often think that metaphors are useful. Again, they're used an awful lot. We use them without thinking. The way ahead is clear, or it's like wading through mud. Let's map it out, or it feels like we're at a crossroads. This is a piece of art, actually, from somewhere in London, which I came across. But these get people to loosen up their language. Bit of maybe the antithesis of traditional project or program management, where we like things in chunks A, B, C, and a nice list of 1, 2, 3, 4. But maybe this represents the reality. And even just by using pictures, you can free up people's thinking. And there's this concept of futures windows And I'll put this resource on the slides that will be available online. There's a futures windows concept that's been developed in the last few years, where if you want organizations to come up with new ideas for the future, you put images of all kinds of things on your display screens, on your panels, and you keep kind of rotating them. You have them in the canteen. This idea of constantly bombarding people with new images and new metaphors, that's quite useful. I think one of the easiest techniques that I think every organization should use is the bug list. I mean, bug listing is a sort of quite a well-known technique. There's no shortage of people who can say, this is what's wrong in my organization. And all you do simply is you kind of reverse it. Okay? You just go around that bend of the arrow and you get ideas. I mean, if I was to be in your workplaces, get 3 people around the table with a cup of tea and say, tell me everything that bugs you, within about 5 minutes we'd have 50 things. So there's 50 potential ideas just by reversing them. And again, you can ask that for customers. Maybe instead of complicated surveys, you just walk up to them and ask them, what bugs you about our service? And you'll get 4 or 5 things, turn them around into ideas. Okay, stakeholder view. This is a really good one because everybody is into stakeholder involvement and stakeholder engagement. So just by adopting the viewpoint of different stakeholders, your real ones, your customers, funders, collaborators, suppliers, or even imagined ones like our Superman here, or it could be Superwoman, you can actually get new insights. But the key thing now, I think, is to lift the constraints. Not about, oh, what would customer A think about that? Would they be happy or not? Imagine they're being projected ahead sometime in the future. I can draw a little line here, I think. Sometime in the future, 10 years' time, what would your customers or collaborators, stakeholders be wanting from your organization? But I think key here is to have a bit of playfulness about that. This technique, I'm sure most of you know, is known as the 5 W's and H. So the question is, if it's such a simple, powerful technique, why not embed it into your projects, into your meetings? So when somebody says we've got a problem about something, if we do the who, what, when, where, why, and how, not only can it help us define the problem more clearly, but we can actually end up with ideas. So, for example, if we have, when is a problem occurring? When our customer's not happy with something, well, after 5 o'clock or whatever, well, that idea could lead to maybe we extend the opening hours by half an hour or an hour or something like that. So it's a nice systematic way. So the challenge to you project managers out there, which I'm sure some of you are, how do you embed this kind of thinking into the formal processes of projects and meetings? I talked earlier about a microculture, and I think climate is more important than techniques. But it's very difficult in the virtual world now when people spread around and people working at their own kind of pace. So how do we find together time? But here's a little simple technique. In fact, I was on a project a couple of years ago where the leader made a point at 10 o'clock every morning, all 4 of us, we actually walked to an on-site canteen. And the other teams didn't. They all had that kind of al desco type stuff, cup of coffee, looking at the screen, etc. But he made a point of taking us all there. And you know what happened? In the walk from the office to that canteen, we had all kinds of conversations. Things kind of loosened and freed up. We had a longer time having coffee. We took about half an hour usually, and we'd wanted to come back and people were thinking, are we being productive? Why aren't we just glued to our computer churning stuff out for our clients? But then it actually created a very, very strong team spirit, and then other people started to copy us. So I think it's important to develop what works for you, develop your own toolkit. And I think every leader needs to have instantly available, let's say, 3 techniques for problem exploration, 3 techniques for idea generation, and 3 techniques for selection and implementation. And by splitting them into those 3 simple kind of phases, you can help lead your people out of forever discussing something into the idea generation phase, then into selection and implementation. So, and I think as a leader, one has to really know these off by heart, not bring in necessarily a facilitator or a consultant, but to be able to instantly use those kinds of techniques. So, Janet, are there any questions that are bubbling up?
Well, I think you answered Mark's original question, which is about how to get creative time integrated and separated out from everyday mode. Yes. But Mark has made another interesting point. He says, I guess there are very few times when we challenge why we do something the way we do. New blood often asks, why do you do it that way? The answer is usually a predictable, that's the way we have always done it. I totally understand that, yes. So I don't know if you've got any ideas for how people can challenge, you know, routine processes.
Yeah, I mean the kind of the smart answer is, well, if you've always done what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. So there's a kind of, if one can make a connection between the current habits and current performance. So if you're happy with current performance, then you could argue keep on doing what you're currently doing. But meanwhile, down the road in another country, there will be a competitor who might sneak up from the side and actually grab your market share. So by the time you've actually discovered that things aren't working so well, or customers are drifting away, or costs are rising, then you'll realize that actually you need to do it, and there's a kind of like a forced change. So yeah, I think we all experience that, and sometimes people just aren't aware of it. So I think as a leader, it's about getting the ideas from new people coming in, new recruits, new blood, as you call them, and giving them a seat at the higher table quite early on.
It's interesting, actually, Peter, because I think as well, as a new person, probably some people might be a bit nervous about giving their ideas, you know, for fear of being shot down. So I think your earlier point about ideas being, you know, never being considered stupid is quite valid. So I've recently been on a coaching course, and it sounds to me some of the ideas here sound very similar to coaching. Would you agree that perhaps a good leader needs to be a good coach as well?
Absolutely, yeah. I think there's a great similarity. So yes, you need to be a good coach, but also even if one isn't necessarily, I mean, coaching is a leadership style that one should be able to use as and when. But beyond coaching, I think there are also lots of structured techniques to take these ideas through the kind of innovation sort of pipeline. So it's a mixture of both, isn't it? A kind of process and technique, but also helping people through a coaching style. So yeah, I think coaching is highly important. Okay, just looking at the time, so let's kind of try and move this towards the end. So I guess a key thing for me is to keep experimenting, and particularly in the health service, in the UK health service, this concept of cycles of inquiry, which I'm aware of, has become very, very popular. And yes, we're all used to kind of experimenting and trialing something, but I think doing rapid cycles of inquiry is important as a leader. To promote this creativity. Just try something, otherwise we forever get stuck in sort of generating lots and lots of ideas and discussions. Try something, see if it works, evaluate it, decide what you want to achieve, or are you achieving what you want to achieve, adjust it, and then go around the circle again. And in the UK, again, health service talk about this PDSA cycle, which is this idea that you plan something, you do it, or you carry out a kind of a test, a prototype. You study the results and the data, get the observations back. You then tweak and adjust something in your system, then move on to the next one. So doing rapid PDSA cycles, and there's a reference at the end. So, okay, so at this point, I've got a final slide after this, which is our kind of a checklist. But let's take some questions from what we've been covering against our aims, which has been about looking at some simple kind of behaviors, ways to nurture getting those ideas flowing, and also techniques to try and spread that spirit of creativity, that practice of creativity to your colleagues who may not be have the same experience as you from a business school background.
At the
So,
moment, there aren't any new questions coming in, Peter, but I would like to say, I mean, I'm very lucky here in that I work in a very creative team, and it's quite exciting because, you know, I can go to the team and say, oh, look, I've got this problem, or I've got this idea, and they're great at feeding back. If you don't have that culture around you, it must be so difficult. I mean, have you got any practical ideas? You know, I like your idea of going for coffee. My husband actually does that one. He's a project manager, and he takes people for coffee, and he gets the look you were talking about of, oh, you're wasting time. Yes. But are there any other simple things you could do you think, just to get people going, you know, to get them bouncing their ideas around?
Yeah, I think yeah, simple things. For example, when people are go to meetings or go on courses or seminars, okay, often they're usually asked to write a kind of a little short report, but actually set up something more formal so they actually brief people. Not that, oh yeah, I went to so-and-so seminar for a day, there were some good bits and bad bits, it was quite interesting, and they give some handouts. Or it's a conference or a meeting or whatever. Get them to actually brief back and create a learning cycle where they brief back not only the learning points for themselves, but you say, right, I want you to suggest 3 things that we can do differently as an organization. So again, we're not mentioning the creativity word, but we are really getting this idea of learning and expanding our horizons and actually bringing in new ideas. So there are ways around it, and I think that's one of the skills of a leader, isn't it? Is to find some way to switch people onto this way of thinking.
That's interesting, actually, because your answer ties in with a question that's just come in from Elizabeth, and she says her colleagues get very nervous when she starts using metaphors, but she prefers visual images. Any ideas to encourage the use of language as well as play?
Yeah,
I think ties in very much with what you're saying.
Use your own language, you know, like and be playful. Like that's a great idea. Let's nail it down and see if it flies. I mean, just sort of, you know, it just creates a bit of mirth, a bit of merriment. So I think this is a really in this kind of career webinar series. If you focus on, well, what can I do better as a leader, as a manager, consultant, or whatever, then people will start to notice. So my idea here is not to sort of rely on the organisation to tell you what the solution is or how you should develop.
Okay, Peter,
look,
we've got. Let's
just
do one last.
Sorry, yeah.
Can I do one last question from Samantha? I know we're slightly overrunning, but we did start slightly late. Yeah. Samantha says, great concepts. Do you have any advice to leaders managing teams across different cultures, especially those from Asia? Well, that's a very interesting question, Samantha.
Yeah, I mean, what's emerging now certainly in the Open University Business School has got, you know, a specialist module on this and leading and managing an intercultural context. But other courses, other universities are talking about this idea of intercultural competence. So I think it's becoming competent about those cultures, knowing about them, immersing yourself, finding out about them, and from that we will find out how other people like to innovate. But even within that culture, it can vary. A friend of mine is from Malaysia, and he was trying to explain to me the difference in innovation between 2 major Japanese companies. I can't remember their names. I think one was Hitachi, one was something else. And I can't remember which way around it was, but it was a very fine point. He was saying, Company A, when they come across a river and they're trying to get to the other side, we'll say, well, let's get some boulders and put these in the stepping stones. And as we go to one boulder and we can get so far, we'll put another boulder in. So it's a shallow river, and we'll eventually get to the other side. He said, no, another company, also in Japan, that he deals with, would say, let's have a detailed planning meeting and understand what the flow rate is and do observations and create a plan and then do it. So even within that culture, there were these 2 companies with very different approaches. But yes, I think some of these concepts are universal about listening and having empathy, but there are subtle cultural differences, I think. So yeah, great question. Okay, let's move on to our final slide. Just a moment. So here's a kind of a sort of checklist, really. I mean, controversial, up for you to question or to use. But number 1 is sharpen your active listening skills. So active, I think, is the word to stress there. Number 2 is maybe create some creative spaces, even if little micro spaces around you or around your team. Number 3 is to model what you want to see. You really have to model those behaviors because you're always more of a model than people think you are, than you think you are. People will actually learn from you in subtle ways that they won't even tell you. Number 4 is to reward idea development and idea generation. Maybe you do it by email or you know, face-to-face meetings, but rewarding is important. Number 5 is experimenting with your cycles of inquiry, this constant trialing and experimenting. And I think 6, be the local expert. I don't mean that in the sense of going against what I was saying earlier about adaptive leadership, but be the local technical expert about creativity, creative techniques, and creativity and innovation. And that local expertise can be transferred across other parts of the organization. So it's not about being an expert in a particular product or service that you are offering, but saying, as a leader, I'm now becoming an expert in this area of how do I promote creativity in my teams. So that's a little checklist. Any comments on that? Feel free to sort of type them up on the screen. But looking at the time, I'm thinking we ought to go to that sort of final slide, which is just details of how you can get hold of me and my organization. And I think we're just about at the end point. So back to you, Janet.
Yes, thank you very much indeed, Peter. That was a really interesting session. And if anybody would like to pass on any questions to me as well that I can pass on to Peter, you can contact me at oubs-alumni@open.ac, and we'll welcome any questions or comments. So it's just, I'd just like to say a final thank you to you all for coming and giving up your lunch hour, and thank you to Peter. And see you on the next one, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Janet. Bye-bye.
Bye.